and welcome to this session about UI technologies at SAP. I hope you enjoyed this year's Tegel experience so far. I'm Marius Obert, and today I want to show you what's beyond SAP UI5 and SAP Fiori elements. As a developer advocate with a focus on UI development, I often get asked why SAP UI5 is supposedly so slow and sometimes a little bit bulky to develop. And often the performance can be improved with simple upgrades or leveraging latest features such as async loading. But I understand there is also some truth to this criticism. After all, SAP UI5 has been invented in 2010, almost a decade ago. And younger frameworks have the luxury that they can build on more recent web standards, and they also use new paradigms that go beyond the traditional model view controller that SAP UI5 is using. And if we're honest, it doesn't matter in which web technology you build your user interfaces. What matters is that it is SAP Fiori compliant. And for that reason, SAP has created two new approaches that could help you to develop Fiori compliant user interfaces with modern web development frameworks such as Angular, React, or Vue. And that's what I want to show you in this session here. But don't worry, if you love SAP UI5 and you're happy with it and you're just here to learn something new, SAP UI5 will stay around for a long time and you'll be able to continue to use it. Let's have a look at the agenda of my session. First, I want to get everyone on the same page and we'll talk about some web development basics. Then I will show you a sample application that I built with three approaches. One is SAP UI5 and the other are the new approaches that you'll get to know. And then we'll talk about some conceptual differences and we'll have a look at the code to show you what the difference between the approaches is and why one might be beneficial for your next project. And last but not least, I have a comparison table for you that will show you some hard numbers side by side that might help you to guide to the decision which project you want to check out in the future. As I said, we start with some basics that you're probably all familiar with. Here I mentioned HTML, which is used for the structure of typical web applications. There is a simple sample snippet here that you can see. There are a couple of div containers, a heading, and two buttons. And when we just arrange them, as you can see there, a typical browser would render them as you see in the picture below. So it's very plain and doesn't look very SAP Fiori-like, all right? When we add CSS to this layer now, so we just add a CSS library, we add classes to the DOM elements, we already see that this looks very much like an SAP Fiori UI. Even though we didn't do anything, we didn't change anything about the structure, we just annotated or added classes to our nodes. Then we could also add JavaScript for the behavior, as you probably know, to, for example, listen to button events or also when the panel is expanded or collapsed. So these are the web technologies that are very widely known, I would say, but the next technology might be new to a couple of you that is called Web Components. And Web Components is basically a collection of several web technologies that bring new advantages and features to the browser. And with that technology, you are able to create new DOM elements and you will be able to use them as they were native elements, such as button or headings in HTML. In the snippet that we see here, we use two new web components called UI5 panel and UI5 button. And we don't have to declare any classes. We just add attributes to style or to define the look and feel of the component. And then we arrange them. And it has a similar UI as you've seen before in the CSS. But additionally, there is logic associated. So for example, this panel that you see is expandable and collapsible. It manages its own state. And you won't have to deal with any other artifacts, or you don't have to customize this logic manually by yourself. And this is exactly where the two new approaches that I want to introduce you today live. There's the fundamental library project, which lives on the CSS layer, and the UI5 web components project that, as the name suggests, lives on the web components layer. So I say it again one more time. The fundamental library project uses CSS for the styling, and UI5 web components come with components that bring a lot of logic with them, but they're also already styled. I've already mentioned it. I built a web application 3 times. First time I built it with fundamental library for React because The two new approaches that I mentioned, they come in the vanilla version, and each version comes with a React wrapper, an Angular wrapper, and a Vue wrapper. So you have two approaches, 4 frameworks each, or 4 projects each, which makes 8 new projects in total, which sounds like a lot. But during this presentation, you'll understand that it's not as much as you think. And all projects are available on GitHub and they're open source. So if you want to check them out, just Google GitHub and, for example, fundamental library for React, which is the framework that I used to build this to-do application. I built a second application with UI5 web components for React and one with SAP UI5. And when I go back again and forth, you see that they look very much alike. There are minor differences in the padding and the margin, and that is due to the implementation and how I use them. But the controls themselves, such as buttons, lists, they are all the same and all are Fiori compliant. So much about a high-level overview of these applications. And in the next section, I want to go a little bit deeper to the next level to show you how the code of that project looks like, how the documentation looks, and what you can expect from these projects.
In this demo, I want to show you the differences that exist between Fundamental Library, UI5 Web Components, and SAP UI5 applications. For this, I built 3 demo applications that we can see here: Fundamentals Library application for React, UI5 Web Components for React sample application, and SAP UI5 application. You've seen that all 3 applications looked very similar because they all follow the Fiori guideline, but they are implemented in different technology. And therefore, we also see when we refresh the page that there is a small rendering delay for the SAP UI5 applications, whereas the rendering time is almost 0 for the React-based applications, which is obvious because of the technical foundation below these 3 web applications. Looking at the code of the applications, we first can have a look at the JSX React code that defines the UI for the fundamental library application. There is a shell bar, an input and a date picker to add new items, and 2 to-do lists, one for the non-selected items and one for the selected items. When we look at the design or the JSX for the UI5 web components for React sample application, this looks very similar. We have a shell bar, an input and a date picker to add new to-do items, and 2 lists here and here. Looking at the design or the layout of the SAP UI5 application is different because here the layout is defined in XML, as you might know. But in the end, we still see a shell bar, an input, a date picker to add new items, and 2 lists here and here. Going back to the application, we can also see that we can add new items such as hello tagged to our to-do list and select a date. Same goes for this application and for this application here. And you've noticed that all of them have this date picker control here that looks the same, but let's have a closer look in the documentation to see if they're actually the same. Here is the fundamental library documentation, and we see a date picker, but we notice there is no behavior associated. And having a closer look at the code shows us why there is no behavior. This is only a list of div containers, labels, and buttons that are enriched with fundamental library classes to create this look and feeling here. But it's only that. It's only a markup with styles. There's no behavior. But when we go on the next level to see fundamental React and how that React layer on top of the fundamental library implements the date picker, we see that there is logic associated. And looking at the code, we see we only need to add that one component tag to our JSX to add a date picker to the web application. Now the vanilla version of the UI5 web components is here, and we see that the date picker also comes with logic out of the box, even though this is the vanilla version and not the React layer. And all we need to do is we need to add this HTML tag to our markup. Looking at the thin React layer that lives on top of the UI5 web components, which is called UI5 web components for React, we again see a date picker with behavior that can be embedded as easily as it was in the other React abstraction layer. We just have to include a date picker. We can define more properties, but that is not required. Going back to the application, we also see that there is this edit button for each to-do item, and when we click it, a dialog shows up. We can modify the item and save it to see the changes live. I want to have a closer look how the dialog works in fundamental React and UI5 web components for React. Going to our UI5 web components React application, we see the dialog down here. The dialog contains two buttons, and when we have a look at the place where the dialog opens, we see that the dialog offers a function that is called open. So the dialog has a semantic function, and it is aware that it can open. So there's no need for us to maintain the state of the dialog that it's open or close. That makes sense because the UI5 web components come with a lot of embedded behavior. On the other side, the fundamentals React or fundamental React library also has a dialog down there that includes two buttons. But here we need to manage our own React state that is called show dialog and forward the state to the component here on this show property. So we are the ones maintaining whether the dialog is visible or not. And for example, in the callback on the onClose function, we change the dialog, we change the state to false, so the dialog disappears. That makes sense because the fundamental React is just a smart abstraction layer on top of the pure CSS classes, but it doesn't come with a lot of behavior. It only comes with the necessary behavior. And this is the reason why we need to maintain that state actively here. I hope this small demo helped you to understand the differences between fundamentals library styles and UI5 web components in the vanilla version, as well as to understand the differences in the React layer that is on top of each framework.
Okay, so you've seen the differences of the projects and where the advantages and disadvantages of each approach might be. And I would say all frameworks, no matter if they're UI frameworks, development frameworks, or general frameworks, make assumption to abstract work. And therefore, you basically trade flexibility for reusability. And all that you want to do is basically decide how much freedom do you want to trade for reusability. So to have a comparison between these technologies, I created this table here and I compared a couple of things, such as the runtime size of the sample applications that we saw. For that, I measured all the files that are transferred from the server to the client when the web page is loaded. And we see that React-based applications are under 2 megabytes and the SAP UI5 application is a little bit over 7 megabytes, which can be explained that the UI5 core loads many things that we didn't use for this demo, such as I18N support and OData clients. I also compared the performance with the Google and Chrome developer tools, the Lighthouse score. It gives you a number up to 100, and the higher the number, the better the performance is. We see that the React-based applications almost are at the top of that scale, whereas the SAP UI5 applications is in the 60s, which is still good, but it can be improved. And that's also what we've seen when we refresh the web applications in the loading time earlier. I would say flexibility-wise, fundamental library styles offers the most flexibility because it allows you to modify even the CSS if needed, and you're obviously able to arrange buttons and lists however you want. UI5 web components also allows you to arrange buttons and controls however you want, but you are less flexible because you cannot easily extend the web component because they're wrapped in this shadow DOM in your browser. SAP UI5, I would say, offers the least flexibility just because it makes a lot of assumptions how web applications should look like and therefore allows you to develop faster. I would also say adherence to open standards. There is SAP UI5 has a little disadvantage just because it started as a proprietary technology a long time ago. And therefore, a lot of stuff has been implemented by SAP on its own. UI5 web components, I would say, have the most adherent to open standards just because they are built with web technology that is standardized and there's a very thin abstraction layer on top of that project. fundamental styles, fundamental library styles, has a larger abstraction layer, which also means more work needs to be done if you want to support a new framework that might be invented in a couple of years, or also if there happens a breaking change in that framework. When we look at the available controls, I would say a clear winner is SAP UI5 with over 650 controls, whereas the other frameworks provide about 80 controls, so only the basic ones such as lists, buttons, dialogues, etc. Looking at the vendors, at SAP or at SAP UI5, SAP provides the development environment, the development tools, and the framework. Whereas for the other approaches, you always have to do the integration yourself. So you have to integrate the SAP library with the native framework and possibly other open source components that you want to do, which might make it a little bit harder to set up and to maintain your project. All of them, or all web applications, will be compatible with the Fiori Launchpad, which means you can integrate them easily in your working environment. SAP UI5 provides on top a native integration with the Fiori Launchpad, so you can consume services such as UI5 Flexibility Service or retrieve user information of the current user. Maturity-wise, there's also SAP UI5 ahead of the others because it is on a stable release, or it has been on a stable release for many years. Whereas the other two projects are still in release candidate version, which could mean that breaking changes could happen on any minor release. I mentioned previously that all of them are themable. So if you use the SAP Theme Designer to adapt your Fiori applications to your corporate identity, this can be done with any web applications because all of them are SAP Fiori compliant. So I would say all approaches have advantages and disadvantages, and it's up to you to decide the one that applies for your needs. Here are a couple of slides, sessions that you can check out if you want to learn more about SAP UI5 during this event. And don't forget to check out the learning experience to continue learning after the TechEd is over. And with that, we come to the end of my session. Thanks for attending. If you have questions, please ask them in the chat or send me an email afterwards. Goodbye.